Okay, thank you, and welcome back, everyone, to our final session of today's summit. Thank you all for your time and your energy through the sessions that we've just worked through. I want to kick us off for this final session, where I have a selection of your colleagues and peers and in a panel. I do want just to do a little bit of reflection on what we've heard first. And I always feel I should start this by saying, I haven't heard everything because I've been running around like a headless chicken, but also the table facilitators have and the note takers have, and it's really important that everything is captured and that where I tried to summarize, please don't feel that this is everything that will be taken away from the summit. It absolutely isn't. But what I did want to do was to try and play back some of the things that I'd heard consistently across the tables. And I'll start with some feedback from in the room, and then I'll hand to my colleague Talia, who's online, who can speak to them. I think one of the things, when we asked you to prioritize some of the different options for the ways in which ncat could work, the thing that I think I heard most consistently across the tables was that, to some extent, the what is less important than the how. And any of those things, any of those 8 options could be useful, but only if they were done well. And sometimes that meant that they were focused and that they were doing things that were new. So, for example, in the case of research can be useful, but only if it leads to action, only if it doesn't replicate what is already known, only if it is done in ways that don't feel extractive or tokenistic. So that question of what does it mean to do each of these things as well as possible was really present in all of the discussions. Another thing I heard was the importance of focusing and doing fewer things better. So not trying to do everything, not spreading this, not spreading itself too thin, and recognizing that this is a team effort and that there's a role for collaboration with other organizations. But perhaps most importantly, and this was probably the priority for many of the tables in the room, for doing this work in partnership and in a meaningful, whether you call it co-production, whatever term you want to use for it, in a meaningful way with disabled people, and with that at the heart of all of the activity. So that point around inclusion was, for many of the tables, was the top priority. Even for those where it wasn't the priority, it was still part of the description of what it means to do any of these things well, which I think is a really clear message for ncat. Some of the other sort of points that came up, I think there were around what's the thing that ncat can do that is unique or that's distinct. So some of you talked a little bit about what's, for example, producing more guidance. If there's already lots of guidance out there, what is it that ncat can do that's distinct? Is it about making guidance that has more teeth? And that's, again, something that came up a lot was this implementation challenge, which, again, is not new, but I think it speaks to that point of making everything that is done as effective as possible and not duplicative. That's a little bit of what we heard in the room. There's so much more. There's so many more specifics around things like what can ncat do to make sure that government has disabled people in positions of influence? What can ncat do to address the gap between rural and urban accessibility? There are so many specific points that came up on tables, which are hugely important. Discussions around how disabled people with children travel. I had a discussion about that. You know, there are real specifics around pain points that are real challenges. So there's lots there in that specificity to pick up. I'm going to, if I can, to hand to my colleague Talia online at this point. She has been facilitating to several groups of people who've gone through the same process as those in the room. So we've got some feedback from them. Talia, your face is enormous. For anyone not seeing Talia, she's here on screen and is just is joining from home and is going to give us a little bit of feedback.
I can see my face quite giant on the screen, but it's really nice to be able to speak to everybody and represent the online portion of this event. I'll just share a little bit about the themes that we've been hearing, which are quite similar to the ones that Lucy shared, but a few things to pull out. So one of the themes that was really common among the breakout groups online was talking about the involvement of disabled people in decision-making alongside transport organizations being really important. I think there's a bit of feedback in the room. Hopefully that's resolved. But It's going to be really important to bring that lived experience to the forefront and involve local knowledge. So that point that Lucy was making about the importance of recognizing the rural and urban, and that people with lived experience are going to be best placed to represent these distinctions and the particularities in these conversations, and seeing that ncat could have a really significant role here in helping to produce that co-production guidance and help facilitate this involvement. Another theme that came out really strongly was accountability. So, keeping track of what changes have been made and haven't, and the impact that this has had. And this really underpins the success of all of the options we discussed. So, again, our participants thought there could be a really important role for ncat here as an independent organization. So, recognizing where there is best practice and rewarding this, as well as calling out where things aren't happening as they should and holding those organizations to account. And one way of facilitating this accountability that we discussed was legislation and the role for ncat here in lobbying the government for policies and regulations as this independent voice, and using the cat panel as a way to ensure that people's voices are really part of this lobbying and are brought to the forefront when we're discussing new policy and legislation. So these are just a few of the themes that came out from the online discussions, and it was great to be able to share this with those in the room as well.
Thank you, Talia, for that. I'm really pleased to be able to bring those two groups together, the online and in person. I don't want to talk for any longer. I have this group of people on the stage who have far more expertise in this, so I'm going to hand straight over to our panel. And what I'm going to do, if it's okay, is just to come to each of you in turn and ask you for your reflections. If you don't mind just introducing yourself, I'm really keen to hear from each of you from the perspectives of your organisations, which are all doing slightly different things, but in this broader space. I'm keen to hear both what the opportunities and the risks or challenges are that you've heard today for making this endeavour of ncat a success. I'm going to start with Carolyn, if that's okay, and if I ask you just to introduce yourself, and then should just be on. You should just be able to hold it up.
Okay, I'll give it a go. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Caroline Stickland. I'm the Chief Executive of Transport for All. We are the disabled-led organisation working for transport justice for all disabled people. So we're user-led, we're also a membership organisation of disabled people up and down the UK. We're pan-impairment and we're pan-modal, and we've been going for just over 40 years. We started gluing ourselves to bus stops back in the 80s and 90s, and believe me, we're very happy to do that again if we need to. So my reflections from today are really delighted to see who's in the room and the passion that we've got in the room. So my reflections on who's in the room first are that we've got a brilliant community of disabled people and disabled people's organisations with passion and insight and real grit from our own lived experiences. And I'm sure similarly in the online group as well. We've also got outside of the room many, many more people from the disabled community. There's over 16 million of us. And I do have a few reflections on maybe who's not in the room and making sure it's really important that we hear all the voices from our community. Also in the room, we've got ncat. That's why we're here, isn't it? So ncat have the money, they have the platform, they have the privilege. So what I think we need to do as a result of the conversations today is I think we need to do some redistribution. Because disabled people, we don't have platform and privilege. I appreciate that I do literally have a platform right now, I'm sitting on one. But generally in life, we don't. Generally, we're asking for accessibility as a nice to have or the last consideration. And I would really call on ncat to not pull the ladder up behind you. Think about how that resource, that platform, that privilege can be shared with those of us who've been living this for such a long time. As I said, 40 years ago, we were campaigning for the right to get on a bus. 20 years ago, we were campaigning for Crossrail to be step-free. A year ago, we were campaigning against the closure of rail station ticket offices. We have lived this fight, and we are the right people to continue this fight. And we need that platform, we need that privilege to be believed and to be taken seriously. So we need action, but that action needs to be disabled-led, it needs to be pan-impairment, and it needs to follow the social model of disability. Nothing about us without us. So by the next summit, my challenge to ncat, to be frank, is to take those themes we heard this morning and put them up as a mirror to yourselves. Where's your accountability? Who's holding you to account to deliver on the promise that this money can offer? What involvement of disabled people is really, really at the heart of it? I've spoken to a few disabled people here today who weren't paid to attend. And I find it really difficult to understand the idea that we can do co-production and co-design of these plans if people are working for free. So what progress can we see on the accountability and the involvement and the attitudes that are inherent to a new centre that has sprung up without the history of the disabled people's movement behind it? We are here to hold your feet to the fire. We're here to provide constructive challenge. But I think we've been waiting too long for change, and we don't want to keep waiting. So that opportunity is there, and we want you to succeed. But we need to see success on the terms of our community, because we know what's needed. We know what it takes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Caroline. And I think that challenge of how could we come back to another summit? And this is the first of a series of planned summits. The next penciled, was told today, for February 2026. How could we come back in 18 months' time and see real change? I think that's a good challenge for the group. Okay, Cameron, I'm going to come to you and ask you again, your reflections on the opportunity and the challenge that you've heard today.
Sure, thank you very much. And firstly, I'm just going to echo everything that Caroline has just said. Like Transport for All, Disability Rights UK, we're a national disabled people-led organisation. The difference being we don't just focus on transport. We look at all aspects of disabled people's lives. We're pan-disability and we're national, we're membership-led. And everything that Caroline said I would absolutely back and reiterate. In terms of reflection for today, I think it's been great to have such a variety of people. It's been great to meet some colleagues who I've only met on Zoom since the pandemic, and then also just some new people who I've met and made new connections, which mean that we'll be better connected as this work goes on. But from my perspective at Disability Rights UK, as I said this morning, transport is the bit in the middle, the glue that connects everything else that Disability Rights UK is interested in. So I think there's an opportunity where we have a new government. There's an opportunity to start engaging with that new government and use the platform, as Caroline just outlined, to start trying to influence and working with that government to get them to see what needs to be done so that disabled people have the same opportunities, choices, and independence that we've been shouting, screaming, demanding for the last 100 years, as long as we've existed. And our history is littered with this idea that non-disabled people decide things for us. And that's got to stop. And it has to start with when there are opportunities such as this, where there is money, there is a platform that Caroline talked about, and disabled people are willing and want to be involved and are saying to you that we want to be part of this piece of work. Put us in the lead, give us a platform, and work with us to influence government. Because long term, whatever happens with ncat, 5 years will happen really quick. We're almost 2 years into it. Now, I don't know if Motability will continue that funding or there will be something else, but the change can't stop at that point. So whatever we do, it's got to leave a lasting legacy. And really, ultimately, the people in control of that legacy will be government. The will, the impetus behind from MPs, and fundamentally money. It's a choice. What we always get told is that there isn't the money to make the changes that you're demanding. My response back to that always is, but in order to make inclusive design, that is the cost. It's not an extra cost. It is the cost of creating a society that genuinely works for everybody. And so my challenge to ncat really is how will you use what you've got now and the opportunity to get behind what disabled people's organisations have been trying to achieve and work with us to try and get government to make that shift long term.
Thank you, Cameron. And I think again, there's this theme of presenting the challenge to NCAT, I think, is a really important one. And I know, Damien, you're going to speak. You're going to wrap up for us and speak a little bit about the future. I'm going to come to my so just a bit of a challenge for you there. It's interesting that this theme, which we heard very consistently across the tables around inclusion, continues to be that priority. And I hope it's okay for me to ad-lib a little bit in here and say that question of do fewer things better, do some things really well, do them in ways that are genuinely inclusive. Thinking about, as NCAT moves into this next phase of funding projects, thinking about how that can be done in ways that are redistributive, that support redistributive justice, I think are really important. I'm going to come to my next two panelists in turn, if I may. Phil, if I come to you and ask you just to introduce yourself and, give us a little reflection on your experiences of the day.
Yeah, well, I'm Phil. I'm representing the Access Association. It used to be an association for access officers who work for local authorities and whose main interest was the built environment. But we're now a much broader church, and there are quite a few of us who are very interested in the issue of the accessibility of transport. And going forward, as we work as part of the expert panel with NCAT, so I'll certainly be looking to involve my colleagues who also have an interest in transport in that process. And there are actually 5 of us here today, Access Association members. So we walk among you. You see, we're everywhere. Personally, I've all my working life, I've been involved in the issue of research into the accessibility of transport for older and disabled people. I have to say that many of the issues we've been discussing today have been discussed for many years. But one thing I was encouraged by was the fact that there's been a consensus in our industry for quite a long time now that the big stuff's been done. Okay, we have low-floor buses, we have low-floor trains, we have the technology, okay, to make the world accessible. It's really the little things. It's the glue in between. It's the human aspects. We might call the software. It's us. It's those little things which actually make the technology work. And I was very encouraged that the 4 themes that we've discussed today were all basically human-based. It was about people's attitudes. I thought a very important one of those themes was accountability. Somebody needs to be accountable for things not being made accessible properly. As well as technology, we have the legal power now. The Equalities Act 2010. It's actually illegal to discriminate against disabled people for any reason, anyone who has a protected characteristic. But somehow companies are getting away with it. So the accountability, I thought, was a very powerful theme. And of course, theme 1, the issue of, as Caroline was saying, it's nothing about us without us. Now, I really thought that one had been accepted. It was mainstream. It had hit home. I was astounded that we're still talking about that. So obviously, that's an extremely important issue. And obviously, as we are talking about it, it means it hasn't been accepted. So the very simple truth that people with a lived experience of disability are experts in their own needs, I mean, surely that has to be a very powerful thing to hit home. In terms of the future direction, I'm aware that these are very challenging times at the moment within which NCAT is working. For a number of reasons, that the very concept of empathy is under fire. The fact that in this room there's a great deal of empathy and love and support and togetherness. As soon as we walk out this building, suddenly we're woke. If we say anything that expresses empathy, we're spouting the nonsense of the wokerati. And the very fact we have those words now, and you know what I'm talking about, means it's a threat to all of the objectives of NCAT. And this is no more true than in the sphere of social media. We had a National Council meeting of the Access Association yesterday, and our social media officer reported that X, or what used to be called Twitter, was an extremely toxic environment, to the extent that we are thinking about stepping back from X and possibly withdrawing from it altogether. And that is just a very valuable statement. And the fact that social media platforms such as X are no longer a useful source of information and support for some disabled people, if they have to withdraw from that, then that's as much an obstruction to them as a car that's parked on the pavement. So I'm very encouraged about that. It's the human issues that are being tackled by NCAT, but I would certainly encourage NCAT to take on board these very modern challenges.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you for that. And that challenge, to ensure that the empathy that I hope that has been felt today is something that we, to explore.
It's outside. It's the others, you see.
Thank you. Okay, Joe, last but not least, I'm going to invite you to close our panel discussion just with your reflections on the day.
Hello everyone, my name is Jaya. I'm Programme Manager at the Motability Foundation. So we support disabled people to make the journeys they choose. We funded the National Centre for Accessible Transport. We also fund a number of grant programmes to individuals and organisations as well. Oops, thank you. So today has been really amazing for me to come and just be in the room. I've been listening to the conversations, just convening the key stakeholders has been fantastic. Some of my reflections on things coming out of conversations were mostly around the importance of human-centered design, co-production and co-design. And I think it's really important that we get it right first time, especially now we're entering a phase of great technological change, moving towards the green energy transition, and that's going to have a huge impact on transport. And so rather than retrofitting, which is really expensive, I think that co-production and human-centered design is really important. And that's one of the key takeaways that I heard on the tables that I were in. And I think one of the members of the panel discussion, of the conversations I was on, said something like, it's important because you're asking the customer what they want, and so asking disabled people what they want is incredibly important. But I think one of the challenges is the fragmentation of the transport system. And so you have loads of different key players in different elements of the fragmentation of the system, and so having that co-production and co-design at every single stage is really important. And this is illustrated, for example, in some of the stories we heard in the morning in terms of the door-to-door journey. There's loads of different organisations involved in that journey as soon as an individual steps outside the door, and so having that co-production embedded all the way through is really important. But having events such as this, where you're convening key stakeholders at different stages, is great, so that we can all start singing from the same hymn sheet, really.
Thank you, Joe. That's a great place to finish. Okay. It's not my job to sum all of that up and respond to it. It's Damien's job to say, but we're going to just give you a moment to think about that by watching a final short video produced by the Research Institute for Disabled Consumers, which just gives us a second go at this question of what would accessible transport mean for you. So I'll play that now.
What would accessible transport mean for you? We asked disabled people, and here's what you told us.
Accessible travel and transport for me would mean that anybody and everybody is able to use transport.
Transport that is available for everyone and is inclusive.
Accessible on so many different levels, so a physical level, social and emotional level, and a financial level.
Improve spontaneous access to public transport.
Enable other people to have it easier than I did and have lots of new choices and new possibilities.
Hopefully it means I can travel with fellow disabled passengers.
If all transport was accessible in a dignified way as well.
It means being confident that I can use public transport as easily as anyone else can.
Breaking down the walls that have grown up since I developed a disability. The walls between me and the rest of society, and give me a chance to gain back a bit of my independence and freedom to just be me.
Okay. Damien, I'm going to hand over to you and ask you to reflect for us, on, I think you're going to talk about the next 100 days for NCAT.
Yes, I've been really privileged to be at this event today and hear so much, even challenges from colleagues, and so much of that lived experience. But one thing I want to really get home to you today, you have an ally in me as a board member for NCAT, someone that really believes in co-production at its purest sense. So I will be making sure that disabled people's voices get heard and get invited into all of the aspects that NCAT does. But we can't do it if we start fighting. We have to come together and actually look at it as an overall challenge that we have to tackle together. So one thing I want to finish on is I've got a challenge for you, all right? Every one of you has got organizations or are attached to organizations. NCAT are here to work with you, and believe me, I will personally lead it from the front. But I want to ask you, what are you going to do in your organizations within the next 100 days to help us achieve what we need to achieve, but not sort of going off into silos and fighting, but coming together and having that really unified voice that Caroline spoke about when she kicked the session off and said, actually, we need to make sure disabled voices are right at the forefront of what we do. And I want you to hold us accountable. I'm a board member that has worked in this space. I am aware that there is some fabulous work done in Wales. And yes, I'm a proud Welshman, so I am going to say that about co-production, and co-production done in a real co-produced way. So there is people doing real co-produced work. Let's get together as a family, because that's what we are. We're a family of stakeholders, a family of disabled people, and people with lived experiences of health conditions. And let's really amplify the messages of NCAT, but also make sure that we do not fragment and start fighting about who's going to hold the money. Let's just all come together and work together as a team. Because if we start working together as a team, that's when we'll get things done. Thank you.
Thank you, Damien. Those are our closing words. I have some housekeeping, which I do have to say, but I think that message that the challenge for the next 100 days is to bring together a group of people to embrace genuine co-production. I hope that next time you hear from NCAT, that you will see some of that progress being made. I hope that next time this group or a similar group comes together for the next summit, that there's a real clear sense that NCAT has a response to that challenge, to the challenges that you've set out, but also can speak to some of those opportunities which may be realized. I have some thank yous from people. There are lots of people who would love to stand up and thank everyone from attending. In the interests of time, I'm going to summarize those. Thank you. Thank you for being here, for being online, for giving us your time and your energy, for giving us your patience as we've gone through the day. We'd love to know what we could do better. That's for my team as the people who are doing the organising, but also NCAT. There are evaluation forms on your tables. There are paper versions. There are online versions. There's a version with a QR code that you can scan and do on the bus on the way home. All of those things are available to you. There are also other opportunities to be involved with NCAT. There is the CAT panel, which is an opportunity to get involved very directly. For those of you who aren't members of that, again, there's information on the tables and online for that. And I think probably, I'm sure the NCAT team won't mind me saying this, but I think their doors are open. Their X accounts, if they have them, are open. They are very much keen to continue these conversations. And I think as they move into this next phase, as Michael outlined earlier, thinking about funding, that first funding call, for example. There's been a lot to think about here in terms of what that funding call prioritizes, how that work is done, how NCAT can ensure that next phase of work is as effective as it can be. So I know that the NCAT team will welcome your input to that. That's it. That's the closing message. Is thank you for your time, and we'll speak to you again soon. Any logistics help that we need getting out of here, please let anybody in the team know. And the sun's come out for those of us in the room for your journey home. So thank you all, and let's give our attendees a round of applause. Thank you for being here. Okay.